Welcome to the Crafty Bunny, and in this one we've got the second part of the Villiany Inks first impressions and review. So the first episode, there'll be a link up top. So that was just the initial unboxing, having a quick blast with them. This next one is going through more in depth and how I've done it. So it's something I mentioned in the last video, and you'll see here on the screen. I think because of the staining, the miniatures need a slightly brighter paint job than normal. So that's what I've done on this Chaos Marine. This was just a random miniature I had lying around from an old box set. So I've built it up, put a very light base coat, just a simple one for the armour, and then we're basically going to go in now and put all the washes on top. So I've got 4 in particular, so I'll be doing Goons Grime over everything. All the fleshy sort of tumorous bits that are popping out the armour, that's going to have the Carrion Crimson, so that one I'm really interested to see how it works with the pigments in it as well when you move it around. And then we'll do some little bits of the Decay of Death, and then on certain other bits I'll be putting in a bit of Sector Rust and other things on there, like the metallics of the armour and whatnot. So as I say, very simple paint job at this point, much brighter than I normally do, because the idea is to let these enamel washes do all the heavy lifting. So you'll see me just painting this on with an old brush. Important that you use synthetic brushes or just something old, because obviously these are spirit based and they will wreck your nice, your nice posh brushes that you've got there for painting. So make sure you use something old. Now, what I noticed when I was doing when I was painting this on, so a couple of things that I've learned is in between each colour, unless you're deliberately going out your way to blend them in some areas on a miniature, actually dry each sort of layer that you've put on. So once you've done, say for example, if you've done Goons Grime over everything, dry that off or let it dry before you go and put another colour on, because they're very, very thin paints and they'll actually run through the model and bleed. And in some of the footage here you'll see it actually pulls on the base of the miniature, because I just kept putting stuff on and not realising that I need to let it fully cure in between. So that's something to bear in mind. So it's a much slower process, but when we get to the end you'll see the finishing product's actually really nice. The Goons Grime that's just a winner in a bottle for me. That's really, really good. Everything else has sort of like a very specific use, which is also something to bear in mind. But yeah, Goons Grime, slap that over everything, and then when you sort of brush it back with the mineral spirits later on after it's dried, it gives a really nice texture and makes everything look gnarly and dirty. That's a definite one I'll be using a lot of. Another thing about them, they look like they're going to go a long way. So, because going back into that first video when I mentioned the price point, obviously they are very expensive, but a couple of drops goes a long way on a miniature, and because of the size of the bottles, you actually are going to get a lot of use out of these, even if you use them a lot. So it's, in terms of price point, the initial outlay is quite expensive, but as I say, if you're going to get more use out of them, it might justify it a bit more for those who are wondering, and that's something to. But on to the actual painting of the miniature itself. So you can see here I've got the Goons Grime. There's that thick sediment that's in there, and that's what gets into all the recesses and makes it look crusty and dirty it up and things. So this is going on all over. It did bleed and mix a little bit with the Carrion Crimson, so what I ended up doing is, when it's fully dried, I went and put the Carrion Crimson back on, just to accentuate the redness of the sort of tumours and any fleshy areas of the actual miniature. Yeah, but the Goons Grime is really nice. So I can see why they say it's a unifying wash. It goes on really well. It bleeds straight into all those little sort of cracks and crevices on the miniature. For things like panel lining and whatnot, really good. Also, I would say so this miniature has not been varnished beforehand. So I was reading up on the actual product, and they said on their website, you don't need to varnish with anything. So this is going straight onto the bare acrylic, no varnish at all, and it's gone on lovely. Hasn't reacted, hasn't stripped it or anything. It just goes on really, really nice. Once you allow each step to actually dry, you go back in with the whatever next colour you want to use and put that on, and so on and so forth. You can allow them to mix and blend a little bit if you want, depending on the miniature and what sort of paint style you want. But after that's done and it's all it's on there and it's starting to dry, it immediately looks a lot gnarlier, a lot darker. It does what like a normal wash or a shade would do from, say, Citadel or Army Painter. You get that sort of effect. It's just then a case of, once it's dry, and we'll see now on the next bit of footage, when you start bringing it back up to that brighter colour that was initially on there, it really does make it pop. So you can see here, like on the miniature, so I've had to do the second layer of the Carrion Crimson, and it's really made the flesh look really, like, you know, sore and sort of something that's really agitated by the armour pieces and things. But then I go in now with a synthetic brush, just mineral spirits, and I'm just pushing the pigment around where I want it, especially on the Goon's Grime, because that leaves a really nice sort of texture and sort of grittiness on the model. I can go in with a Q-tip as well and sort of dab around, do little bits of armour panel, and you'll see me doing very gentle circular motions to buff the armour up. And again, that's to get that base layer back up. Same with the pustules and the sort of tumours on the miniature. You get that initial white layer, and then the more agitated red, well, pinky to that sort of glossy red, it goes into the crevices all around it, and it really does. It adds a lot of effect to the actual paint job. It's one of those as well. When it's fully dry, I'd probably, if this was a full miniature I was doing, I'd then go back in with the base colours and touch up areas and things, and pick out all the little finer details like the goggles on the face and whatnot. But yeah, really impressed with these paints. They're going to take a long time to sort of get my head around fully and get them to work exactly the way I want. But I've spent a good couple of weeks with these now on little test pieces. I'll do a proper paint tutorial video where I'm using the Villiany Inks and seeing exactly what they can do once I've got a bit more practice under my belt. But again, this is just for that first impressions, and I am genuinely impressed with these. As I mentioned in part 1, it's not grimdark in a bottle. You know, you've got to persevere with this, you've got to work with it, and like with anything in the hobby, practice makes perfect. But they are very good, and if this is a sort of paint style that you want to, if you like to do, you want to emulate, I can definitely recommend this product, if the price point's okay for you, because as I say, it is very expensive, despite the amount of actual ink and things you actually get in each bottle and how long they're actually going to last. It is still an initial very expensive outlay. So onto the actual reductive technique now. So here I'm going on to the sort of dual Q-tip method. So you dip the one end in the mineral spirits, you put that on where you want to reduce and remove the pigment and the stain, and then with the dry side you sort of roll it on, and it buffs it up to that original colour. It's still got a slight stain into it, but it leaves everything being pushed into the recesses and makes them stand out and be pronounced more. The Carrion Crimson in particular on this model, when we see the close-up shots later on, that's really punched and looked really well. I mean, you can see here on the armour, just where I'm pointing out with the paintbrush, it's extremely mould, and same with the skin. The deep recesses have got this really like gelatinous, bloody sort of quality, and then on the wider areas it's that slightly pink aggravated sort of skin going into the initial base coat. But yeah, it's very simple methods, but it's again, reiterating, it's going to be a lot of practice to absolutely nail it, and I do recommend going and watching other people's videos. You've got the Feral Painter, who does a lot of stuff. The Grimdark Compendium itself, they've got some really fantastic videos and showing like the different things you can do with these paints and surface variation and things. So again, another way you can move the pigment around is with the brush itself. So this is where I'm going for a more targeted and deliberately pushing those little bits of pigment into the folds of the skin and things and brightening those up, and going into very specific areas with the brush. The Q-tip's more of like a general, really good for big chunky armour panels and larger areas, but if you want to get some fine detail and move things around very specifically, then get yourself a small synthetic brush and just and take your time with it. I've got a bit of cloth on the table that and if I feel like there's too much mineral spirit on the brush, just give it a dab and then go in and just gently stroke. And if you do vertical motion with the actual brush, you can get these lovely sort of streaks of grime and grit and stuff and detritus on the models, and especially when you're pulling from like those deep cracks, pull it down the model and it looks like strings of rust that's just trickling down the miniature, and it gives a really nice and unique sort of again that grimdark aesthetic, you know, something that's quite grimy and gnarly to look at. Really impressed with these paints. And here it's the exact same method, but with the Carrion Crimson, doing very deliberate areas. You can see how little I've actually got in that little metal dish, but very deliberate areas, and trying to get it into those deep recesses, just to pull that sort of stained on the skin to the brighter area a bit more, where I feel like I've gone a bit too far. And it really makes it pop. It sinks into those recesses and gives like a glossy quality when you're using it neat. Obviously you can actually thin these down with mineral spirits, and they'll give different sort of variations in texture, but around sort of like where that tentacles bust through the shoulder pad, just a couple of layers of this and it really did make it pop. So this is the actual miniature after I've pulled everything back as far as I wanted. Still, you can see there's some little wet bits. That's where the actual mineral spirit's still drying off. But overall, really impressed. We'll do some close-up photos as well at a higher definition, so you can really see the detail on the paint job. But yeah, the panels of the armour are really, you know, nice and mottled. Look like they've had a lot of wear and tear. You've got that rust and decay sort of coming out of the parts of the armour that are matching with the actual flesh and so on. And then like in between the actual armour folds themselves, you've got this dirt and this grit which would build up over time, and it just makes the model look a bit more lived in, and definitely gives more of a sort of themed aesthetic compared to if you just did like a normal wash. Because, like, you know, putting a shade over or an army paint wash, things like that, over a miniature, it's really good. It gets into the recesses and it makes the details pop, which is what you want. This does exactly the same thing, but it leaves that extra bit of residue and just makes it feel a bit more lived in and again, a bit more grimdark and disgusting. These last two photos in particular, you can really see the sort of texture variation on the armour and the flesh, and it's really made it punch, and it's got that aesthetic which I want. As I say, if this was a full model I was doing an absolute full paint job on, I'd then go in back with the base colours, touch up some areas and things, and pick out those finer details. So we'll do that in a future video. But yeah, in terms of so my first impressions of the Villiany Inks are, firstly, if you can afford it, because they are expensive, then and you want to paint in this style, these are going to help you sort of progress in that, and I'd strongly recommend them. If it's something you just want to dip your toe in, then like I said in part one, maybe just the goons grime, do a bit of practice, and if this is too grimy and too dirty, then obviously don't go for these. One important note though is just don't think it's going to be, oh, you whack this on, you brush it with a Q-tip and it's all done. You know, there's a lot of practice, and there's going to be, there's a lot of expertise within this actual product, and you're going to have to take your time with it, like with anything in the miniature hobby. Practice makes perfect, and if you're willing to put the time in and persevere, these are a really, really nice paints, and for me they're going to be a mainstay on the channel, something I'm going to use a lot. I'm already starting now to look at miniatures that will help accentuate these and how they work, but it just feel like just a generic, again, looking at the last few images, the folds in the armour, the mould effect that's coming on, all that texture variation that you get from it, the gloss and the satin to the matte, it's really nice, and it's interesting to see how these will perform on a full paint job from start to finish. But thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.